screaming about HOA bylaws? I have. And the only reason I didn't double over laughing was because I had to keep my tractor steady while pulling her luxury SUV out of the hole she swore didn't exist. But let me back up a bit, because this disaster and heels didn't land in that ditch by accident. It started weeks ago with a simple dirt path, a stolen shortcut, and a whole lot of entitled attitude. My name's Sam. I'm a retired vet with a modest patch of land on the edge of town. Modest to some, maybe. To me, it's everything. It's the farm my grandfather bought after the war, the place my father taught me to drive a tractor, the only place I've ever felt truly settled after years of living out of duffel bags and sleeping in places that looked nothing like home. I like peace, coffee at sunrise, and not having strangers treat my property like a public thoroughfare. The road that cuts across my front field might look like a shared gravel lane, but it's fully mine. Every loose stone, every pothole filled, every blade of grass along its edge, it's on my deed, maintained by my time and fuel, and lined with signs that clearly say private property. Not subtle little signs either. Big white letters on a dark green background visible from a quarter-mile down the county road. And yet, nearly every morning, just after 7, the same white luxury SUV barrels down it, kicking up dust like it's a racetrack. Behind the wheel, Karen. Always Karen. You know the type. The kind who weaponizes politeness and treats regulations like personal decrees. Highlights too perfect, sunglasses too big, a permanent expression of mild offense etched onto her face. Her voice 2 decibels too loud even when she's whispering. She's the head of our local HOA, though I'm not even part of it. My land falls just outside their carefully manicured borders, a dusty, inconvenient reality next to their pastel-colored houses and perfectly edged lawns. Still, she acts like she owns the county, like my land is an eyesore, an uninvited guest, at her meticulously planned garden party. At first, I let it go. Figured maybe she was lost or trying to avoid school traffic on the main road. People make mistakes. I waved once, a simple 2-finger salute from the porch. No wave back, just a glare from behind those oversized sunglasses. The second time, she was practically airborne as she hit a small dip in the road. I walked out to the edge of the driveway, held up a hand, a universal sign for, "Slow down, please." She sped by, closer than necessary, splashing mud up my jeans. I felt the heat rise in my face but bit back the words. The third time I put up a fresh sign, bigger letters, even bolder font. Private drive, no through traffic. I hammered the post in myself, deep and solid. She drove around it like it was a joke, like it was a silly decoration I'd put up to amuse myself. That's when I knew the wave, the hand signal, the sign. None of it mattered. This wasn't about getting lost. This was deliberate. She saw my land as some dusty shortcut between her house and the highway, saving her maybe 5 minutes tops. My fence line meant nothing to her. My property rights were an inconvenience, my dignity even less. I tried the polite route one last time. Went to the HOA meeting, even though I wasn't required to, sitting in a folding chair in a room that smelled faintly of air freshener and passive aggression. I waded through their ridiculous debates about mailbox heights, the exact shade of acceptable beige for house trim, and the proper angle for lawn edging until it was my turn to speak. I explained the issue calmly, factually. Showed them a copy of my deed. Karen, seated at the head of the table, smiled like a snake that had just swallowed a particularly juicy mouse. She leaned into the microphone, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Maybe Sam," she said, and I quote, "should be grateful people even want to drive past his little barn. It adds a certain rustic charm." The room chuckled nervously. That's when I knew. This wasn't ignorance, it was contempt. The final straw came after a rainstorm, the kind that turns the clay soil slick and treacherous. The dirt road was a mess, the ground soft enough to leave deep impressions. I woke up to the sound of an engine revving too high, tires spinning. I looked out and saw tire tracks a foot deep across my pasture, a raw brown scar across the green, and near the fence, lying a dead chicken squashed flat. She'd veered off the drive and through my land like she was racing in a demolition derby, leaving destruction in her wake. I stood there, boots sinking in the mud, staring at the wreckage, the pathetic heap of feathers and bone that had been one of my hens, and I swear I could still hear her playlist echoing from the distance, some pop star wailing about being unstoppable. A cold calm settled over me. I didn't say a word that morning, didn't curse or rage, just walked back inside, poured another cup of coffee, and started drawing up plans. Not for another sign, not for another polite conversation, for a solution that spoke Karen's language, inconvenience and public spectacle. I called Pete, an old army buddy who now ran a landscaping outfit, told him I needed a trench dug, not a little drainage ditch to move water. I wanted a serious trench, a vehicle trap, just wide enough to swallow a car tire, just deep enough to ruin a morning and maybe a pair of expensive heels. Legal, of course. I wasn't looking to hurt anybody, just send a message. Loud and muddy, Pete was in immediately, said it sounded like the most fun he'd had all year. A welcome break from manicuring suburban lawns. Combat landscaping, he called it, grinning. We got the permits, double-checked the property lines with a laser level, and even checked with the sheriff's office to make sure we weren't crossing any legal lines. Deputy Harris, who I'd known for years, just shook his head and said, "Some folks gotta learn the hard way, Sam. Just make sure you got plenty of those private property signs up." Everything was by the book, every I dotted, every T crossed. Then, one night just after dusk, we rolled out the excavator. The low growl of the engine seemed to vibrate through the quiet fields. Took about 4 hours of careful digging. We made it clean, straight, and invisible from a distance. A little tarp pulled over the fresh dirt, a sprinkle of gravel to blend it in. The trap was set. I parked the tractor nearby the next morning, pretending to do some routine work on the fence line. Birds chirping, sun climbing slow over the barn, casting long shadows. The air was cool and smelled of dew and damp earth. Then, like clockwork, I heard it. That engine whine, tires on gravel, approaching too fast. I didn't even have to look. The moment was coming. I could feel it in my gut, a tight knot of anticipation and grim satisfaction. And then came the sound I'll never forget. A loud crunch, a metal groan of tortured suspension, followed by the high-pitched scream of someone realizing their fancy car just became a very expensive, very muddy sculpture in a hole they never saw coming. Karen's white, luxury SUV sat nose first in the trench, back wheels spinning uselessly in the air, mud flying in wild arcs. She was honking the horn, a frantic, desperate sound yelling inside the vehicle. The whole SUV shook as she tried to reverse and rocket out, but the front tires were hanging just above the trench bottom, completely useless. Her window rolled down, and her voice pierced the morning air like a drill boring into concrete. "Help me, you old psycho! You can't leave me here! This is illegal!" I stood frozen for a beat, then dropped my hammer and walked toward the scene slowly, deliberately, savoring every step like I was strolling into a movie I'd already watched 10 times and still loved. She flung open the door, stepped out onto the sloped dirt edge, and instantly slipped. Her fancy white pants were streaked with brown before her second foot even hit the ground. One heel snapped with a sharp crack. She stumbled, cursed, and flailed like a drunken flamingo trying to do ballet on a gravel pile. When I finally reached her, she was waist-deep in the mud, red-faced, holding one broken shoe like it had betrayed her personally. "Are you okay, Karen?" I asked, my voice calm, maybe a little too calm. She barked back, mud dripping from her chin. "Okay? I'm going to sue you into the next century. You did this on purpose." "The trench is on my land," I said calmly, "and it's clearly marked. You had no business driving on my property in the first place." She waved her muddy arm toward the empty road behind her and screeched, "But I've been using that road for months without issue." "That's not a defense, Karen," I said, letting the silence hang for a moment. "That's a confession." Her face turned, a deeper shade of crimson, and for a brief moment I actually thought she might charge at me. Instead, she stomped back to the SUV and tried to get in, only to realize she dragged half the ditch in with her. Her once pristine car interior now had a foot of sludge coating the floorboard. She screamed again, this time more shrill, and started, demanding that I tow her out immediately. I took my time walking to the barn, fired up the old tractor, letting its familiar rumble fill the air while I fetched the thick steel chain. By now, a couple of neighbors had gathered by the fence line, drawn by the commotion. Word must have spread quick. I spotted Pete leaning on his truck, chewing on a toothpick with a grin that stretched ear to ear. Someone was filming on their phone. I didn't mind. In fact, I was counting on it. I drove the tractor slow, dragging the chain like a lazy tail behind me. Karen stood tapping her foot and swatting at flies, though I'm not sure how many of them were real or just imaginary insults swarming in her head. I attached the chain to her back axle and the other end to the tractor hitch. Then I gave her one final look and asked if she was ready. She snapped that I should have done this 20 minutes ago and that she'd be contacting her lawyer. I nodded, slipped the tractor into gear, and rolled forward with steady, unwavering pressure. The SUV groaned, then lurched, then popped free with a wet sucking sound that was strangely satisfying. I didn't stop. I towed her all the way back through the field, not gently, not quickly, but deliberately, straight into the lower paddock, where the compost pile sat. The wheels sunk in just a little more as I cut the engine. She got out again, looked around at the flies, the faint smell of manure, and screamed so loud a flock of birds took off from a nearby tree. I told her she could call a tow truck if she wanted, but warned her that any further trespassing would result in a police report. She ignored me and stormed off, slipping one more time in the muck. Her SUV was left parked like a failed trophy in the middle of my paddock, brown streaks across the hood and bumper like war paint. I walked back toward the house as Pete clapped slowly and sarcastically from the fence line. A few other neighbors gave small applause or thumbs up. I didn't acknowledge it. I didn't need to. The message had been sent. Later that day, the video made its rounds on the local neighborhood group chat. Someone had added music to it, one of those dramatic opera scores people use for comedy clips. It was titled, "The Trench Awakens." Within hours, it had over 1,000 views. People were commenting with popcorn emojis and cheering me on. A few even said they wished they'd thought of it themselves. Karen, of course, didn't take it well. She tried to post a rebuttal claiming the trench was a malicious booby trap, but once folks saw the warning signs and footage of her ignoring them, the sympathy dried up like a puddle in the sun. That evening, I got a call from someone claiming to be her husband. He said I should be ashamed of myself and that Karen had been traumatized. I told him he should be more concerned that his wife was endangering herself by trespassing and driving recklessly. He hung up without another word. I poured myself a whiskey and sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the trees. The trench still gaped in the road like a scar, and Karen's SUV sat where I left it. Birds now using the roof as a perch. It wasn't just about the car or the mud. It was about respect, about boundaries, about reminding someone that you don't get to walk all over people just because you have a title or a fancy car. By morning, the SUV was gone. Someone must have finally come with a winch, strong enough to drag it out. The tire marks left behind told the whole story. They twisted and bucked and scraped, a messy trail of desperation and damage. I left them there for a few days before raking the land smooth again, let the memory linger just a little longer. Karen didn't show her face for a while. No SUVs came down the road. No music blared through the field. For the first time in months, the mornings were quiet again, peaceful. But I knew better than to think it was over. Karen wasn't done. People like her rarely give up. They just reload. And I was ready for whatever came next. 3 days of silence passed like a breeze through the fields, and I almost believed it was over. 3 days of silence passed like a breeze through the fields, and I almost believed it was over. No screeching tires, no barking voices echoing across my pasture. Not even a trace of Karen's perfume-choked SUV. But peace, I've learned, is not something folks like her leave untouched. It's something they pause just long enough to reload before stirring the pot again. And sure enough, on the 4th morning, I found a new envelope in my mailbox, not postmarked, hand-delivered. Tucked inside was a letter with the HOA logo, typed in a font so aggressive it looked like it was yelling even. Before I read the word, it accused me of creating a dangerous hazard, willfully trapping a resident, and demanded immediate removal of the trench. It was signed by Karen herself with a ridiculous flourish at the bottom like she thought her name was some kind of legal stamp. I chuckled, folded it neatly, and slid it into my growing stack of documented nonsense. Then I brewed coffee and went on with my day. But she didn't stop there. That evening, as I was locking up the barn, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up my driveway. Deputy Harris stepped out, all calm and steady like he was here for a fishing license inspection. I greeted him with a wave and asked if this was about Karen. He chuckled softly and said she'd filed a complaint claiming I had laid an intentional trap to cause bodily harm. He leaned on the fence post while I pulled out my folder and handed him the printed map, the time-stamped photos, the footage stills, and even a copy of the letter she just delivered. He didn't even make it halfway through before shaking his head. "Sam," he said, "I think she's more likely to get herself arrested than you, but I gotta follow up when someone cries foul this loud." I thanked him for being decent about it, and he promised to file the report as resolved with no action required. Still, the visit confirmed what I already suspected. Karen wasn't done throwing darts at the wall, hoping one would stick. Later, that night I got a message from Ron, the neighbor a few blocks over, who'd once been fined by Karen for having a garden gnome that she claimed was a violation of aesthetic guidelines. He said Karen had begun telling people that I was mentally unstable, that I was a danger to the community, that I had snapped. She was painting a picture of a bitter old man with a vendetta against the HOA. The real problem for her was that more and more people were done listening. I hadn't just dug a trench in the road. I'd cracked open the surface of something bigger. A lot of folks in the neighborhood were tired of her nonsense, tired of the fines, the threats, the arrogance. They'd just been waiting for someone to stand up to her first. I knew the smear campaign would get worse before it got better. Sure enough, within a week, someone slid flyers into mailboxes claiming I was endangering children by turning the road into a hazard, that I was threatening legal action against anyone who walked past my house, that I was unstable and possibly armed. It was laughable. I've never even raised my voice to a neighbor in 20 years. But the real kicker was that her flyer included a blurry photo of the trench from before I reinforced it, as if that proved I was running a war zone out of my pasture. By then, I'd had enough. I printed my own letter. Short, polite, factual. I attached a QR code that linked to the video footage of her driving into the trench, ignoring the signs and screaming obscenities. I explained the legal status of my land, the records from the county, and the fact that the sheriff had already cleared the matter. I didn't insult her, didn't accuse her, I just told the truth. I made 50 copies and dropped them in every mailbox along the outer road and near the HOA boundaries. I didn't need to win a popularity contest. I just wanted people to know I wasn't the lunatic she was trying to make me out to be. The next HOA meeting was packed. I didn't attend, but Ron did, and he filled me in later that night. Apparently, people were furious. Several brought printed screenshots of Karen's fake letters. Others came with their own stories of fines and intimidation. One woman had been fined for having her shutters painted a shade too close to green. Another was written up for putting out Halloween decorations before the 1st of October. The tension boiled over when a retired teacher named Marie stood up and asked how many board members had actually voted for these rules. Turned out Karen had been making a lot of decisions solo, claiming emergency authority when no such clause existed. The board was stunned. Half of them didn't even know about the trench incident until that night. A motion was proposed to suspend Karen from her role pending investigation. It passed barely, but it passed. She stormed out of the meeting before it ended. Word spread quickly. By the following week, Karen's house had a for sale sign planted in the front lawn. Big, bold, and ironic. A professionally manicured lawn she'd once used to judge others was now the billboard of her retreat. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw a party, but I did take a quiet walk to the edge of my property and look down that road, smooth now and empty. The trench had served its purpose. More than that, it had triggered a ripple effect through the neighborhood that had been building for years. People started talking to each other more, not just over fences, but at barbecues and meetings and even casual strolls. There was a sense of community slowly blooming again, the kind that thrives when fear isn't running the show. I replaced the trench with a simple gravel mound and a fresh set of signs, clear, legal, firm, and I installed a trail camera just in case someone else ever thought they could shortcut their way across my boundaries. Pete offered to help pour concrete footers for a future gate if I ever needed it. He said it half joking, half serious, and I told him I hoped I'd never need another trench. But if I did, I knew exactly how to dig one. Not out of spite, not for revenge, but for dignity, for the simple principle that your land, your peace, and your right to be left alone matter more than any HOA title or empty threat. And as for Karen, last I heard, she was trying to get a new position in a different neighborhood committee 2 towns over. Some folks never learn, but she'd never be a problem here again. A few weeks passed after the HOA meeting, and the whole neighborhood seemed to breathe a little easier. It was like someone had opened a window and let the stale air out. The silence from Karen's side of things was almost unsettling at first, like the calm before a storm. But then the for sale sign stayed up, and the whispers quieted down. People were tired of her antics, and the trench had become a sort of local legend. Folks would slow down when passing by just to see if the ditch was still there, and every now and then, I'd catch someone sneaking a picture of the warning signs or peeking through the fence. I didn't mind. It had turned into a strange kind of landmark, the place where the HOA queen got dethroned by a quiet old man with a tractor and a spine. One afternoon, I was working on the fence line when a teenager I'd never seen before wandered up. He looked nervous, like he thought he wasn't supposed to be there, and kept glancing back at the road. He said his dad lived nearby and told him to come see the trench guy. I laughed and offered him some iced tea. He asked a few questions about how deep it was, how I dug it, and whether the story was true about the SUV getting stuck and needing to be pulled out with chains. I told him every word of it was real, and that his dad could vouch for most of it if he wanted. He grinned wide and said his dad was still laughing about it weeks later. Apparently, even the sheriff had brought it up during a poker night at the firehouse. I didn't set out to be a neighborhood icon, but I'll admit it felt good knowing people were standing up for each other a little more now. A few days later, Pete came by with a 6-pack and a grin. He'd been getting calls from folks wanting their own versions of Karen-proofing. He just finished a trench and gate install for a woman 2 streets over who said she wanted to be prepared in case the new HOA president decided to flex their authority. Word had spread fast. Pete had even started advertising it on his website with a picture of my property as the banner. He called it tactical landscaping and joked that I should get a cut of the profit. I told him I'd settle for a steak dinner and a cold drink the next time he had a night off. Business was booming for him, and honestly, it couldn't have happened to a better guy. Despite all the change, I kept my routine steady. Wake up early, feed the animals, walk the fence, check the trail cams. Nothing fancy, just peace. But the quiet made me notice things more. Like how a few people who used to avoid talking to me now waved when they passed by. Or how the new family, who moved into the corner house, came by with a pie to introduce themselves and ask about the local wildlife. I showed them where the deer usually pass through and warned them about the fox that liked to dig near the compost pile. They thanked me like I'd given them a tour of a national park. It was strange how one act of standing firm had created so much connection. Then came the moment I didn't expect. A large manila envelope arrived in the mail. No return address again. Inside was a letter typed just like before, but this time the tone was different. Apologetic, almost desperate. It was from Karen. She wrote that she had been wrong, that she had acted out of stress and pressure, and didn't mean to cause trouble. She said she never realized how much she was upsetting people, and that losing her HOA role and putting her house up for sale had made her reflect. She even mentioned therapy, which I wasn't sure was genuine or just an attempt to sound sympathetic. She said she hoped there were no hard feelings and that she wanted to leave things on a better note. I read the letter twice, then a third time. I didn't feel anger. Not really. Just a heavy sort of silence, like the last note in a song that didn't quite resolve. There was no mention of the damage she'd done or the lies she spread, but there was at least an attempt to step back from the cliff. I folded the letter and put it in the same drawer where I kept her first threat. Not out of bitterness, just to remember the difference between the two. one born of arrogance, the other of regret. Whether she meant it or not wasn't mine to judge. That weekend, a group of neighbors invited me to a cookout, said it was partly a celebration, partly just a chance for folks to spend time together without drama. I brought coleslaw and a fresh pie. When I showed up, there were chairs arranged in a big circle, music playing low and kids chasing each other through the grass. Pete was already there holding court by the grill like he'd been born with tongs in hand. Ron handed me a drink and said I looked more relaxed than he'd ever seen. I told him it was the first month in a year I hadn't had to clean tire tracks out of my field. Someone had made a little cardboard cutout of an SUV half buried in a pretend trench and set it up next to the drinks table. People were taking pictures with it. I just laughed. I wasn't the kind to chase attention, but it felt good seeing humor win over hostility. We told stories, laughed, and watched the sky turn gold. As the sun dipped low, I realized how long it had been since I'd felt part of something. Not just a landowner defending his fence, but a neighbor, a friend, someone welcome in the circle. By the time I headed home, the stars were coming out. I walked the long way back, past the road where the trench used to be. The ground was smooth, now, reinforced and posted clear, but I could still see it in my mind. The way Karen's SUV hung in the air like a warning bell. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just kept walking. I had no idea who would move into her house or what the next season would bring. But I knew this. Some fences are worth rebuilding. Some roads are better left alone. And sometimes the best kind of peace is the kind you have to dig for with your own hands. By the time I headed home, the stars were coming out. I walked the long way back past the road where the trench used to be. The ground was smooth now, reinforced and posted clear, but I could still see it in my mind. The way Karen's SUV hung in the air like a warning bell. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just kept walking. I had no idea who would move into her house or what the next season would bring, but I knew this. Some fences are worth rebuilding, some roads are better left alone, and sometimes the best kind of peace is the kind you have to dig for with your own hands. The for sale sign at Karen's house eventually came down. A new family moved in, quiet folks with 2 shy kids and a dog that barked at squirrels. They waved every time they saw me, and I'd wave back. The tension in the air that Karen had cultivated for years slowly dissipated like morning mist. The neighborhood settled back into a comfortable rhythm. The trench became less a symbol of conflict and more a quiet reminder of boundaries respected. 1. Crisp autumn morning, weeks after the new family had settled in, I was out checking the fence line near the road. The air smelled of damp leaves and wood smoke. As I walked, I noticed something small and bright tucked into the base of one of the new fence posts right where the trench had been. It was a small, intricately folded paper crane, vibrant red against the dull brown of the post. It felt delicate, almost fragile in my rough hands. There was no note, no explanation. Just the crane, a paper crane, a symbol of peace, of hope, wasn't the kind of thing Pete would leave. It wasn't the kind of thing any of the neighbors would leave. It felt deliberate. A message of sorts. But from who? And why? I kept the crane, put it on my desk, a tiny splash of color in a room filled with worn books and old maps. It became a quiet puzzle, a question mark in the new piece. Every now and then I'd pick it up, turning it over in my fingers, wondering about its origin. Then, about a month later, another one appeared. This time, a vibrant blue crane, resting on the small gravel mound where the trench used to be. Again, no one around, no note, just the silent offering. Blue, red, 2 colors, 2 cranes. This became a pattern. Every few weeks, another crane would appear in different spots around my property, always near the road, always placed with a quiet precision. A yellow one on the mailbox, a green one on the fence post by the main road entrance, a purple one tucked into the branch of a small oak tree near the pasture, each one a different color, each one a silent, beautiful mystery. I started keeping them together in a glass jar on my desk. The jar filled slowly, a rainbow of folded paper, a growing collection of unspoken messages. I thought about the new family. Maybe it was one of the kids, but they seemed too shy, too young to be this consistent, this deliberate. I thought about Karen. Could this be her? A strange, silent apology? It didn't feel like her style. Her apologies, if they came at all, were usually loud and self-serving. The cranes continued through the winter, white against the snow, orange against the bare branches. They were a quiet counterpoint to the stillness of the season. They were also a constant low-level suspense. Who was leaving them? Why? What did they mean? Then in early spring, as the first green shoots were pushing through the thawing earth, I found a black crane perched on the smoothed-over ground where the deepest part of the trench had been. Black. It felt different from the others. More significant. And this time, tucked underneath the crane was a small, folded piece of paper. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The answer. The explanation. I unfolded the paper, my fingers trembling slightly. It was a single line, written in a small, neat hand. Thank you for digging, that was all. No name, no signature, just those 3 words. Thank you for digging. Thank you for digging. For the trench, for the disruption, for the mess, or for something else. Thank you for digging. For peace, for boundaries, for standing firm. I looked at the black crane, then at the jar full of vibrant colors on my desk back at the house. The black one felt like an ending, a final punctuation mark. And that single line, it resonated with a power that no shouting match or legal threat ever could. It wasn't about the trench, not really. It was about what the trench represented. It was about the courage to draw a line, to say no, to refuse to be trampled on. It was about creating the space for something new to grow, something better than the fear and the bitterness that had been there before. I never found out who left the cranes. I never saw anyone near the road when they appeared. It remained a beautiful, silent secret. But I didn't need to know the name. The message was clear. Someone somewhere had seen what happened. They had understood, and they were grateful. The black crane joined the others in the jar. They sat there, a colorful testament to a quiet victory, an unexpected connection forged in the most unlikely of places. The road stayed clear. The neighborhood continued to heal. And every time I looked at that jar of paper cranes, I was reminded that sometimes the most profound messages are delivered in silence, and the most powerful transformations begin with a single courageous act of digging.